Hello everybody, good afternoon and welcome to another De Montfort University live talk. I hope you are all doing well and welcome to this session exploring the world of psychology. So for this afternoon we have got a taster lecture and a talk and a couple of demos for you as we kind of give you a bit of an insight into exactly what it's like to study psychology at De Montfort University. And we've got some very exciting things to kind of explore as we kind of go through this next sort of presentation. And I say there's going to be a little bit of a demonstration as well. So we do hope you enjoy the next sort of hour and a half as we go through these different activities. My name is Ben. I'm only going to stick around for a minute here at the beginning to kind of kick off proceedings because I'm going to hand over to a couple of fantastic people who are going to be leading these demonstrations. And if you decide to study psychology with us, could be your teacher in just a couple of years. So do stick around for that because we'll be doing some introductions in just a moment. These sessions are going to be quite interactive. So we're going to be using the live chat, which hopefully you've seen along the side. If you're on YouTube, you should be able to access the live comments as you would normally with YouTube comments. If you're currently on our DMU webpage, you should see a little stream chat button there on the side. You can click on that. I know that there's been a couple of issues with it. So if you can't see it just yet, or if you get any sort of issues or anything, you can click on the video and actually go straight through to YouTube that way. And we would love to hear from some of you in the comments. Just give us a little shout out. Let us know you're there. And if you've got any questions throughout the session, we'll either try and address them, or what we'll do is we'll pop them into the Q&A at the end, and we are going to run a Q&A with our academics and with some of our students and graduates as well. So again, like I say, it's a really good opportunity just to find out a little bit more information about psychology in general. And again, obviously you'll see there's a little code and a little link on the screen, and we'll be using that as part of some of the demonstrations and some of the interactive activities as we go through today's session. So that's all the kind of admin-y stuff that I've got to do at the top, but let's move over to some introductions. First of all, I would like to hand over to Stephanie, who is going to let us know what she does at DMU.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Cook, and I'm a lecturer in psychology here at DMU. I've been here for nearly 3 years now, and that's gone very, very fast. I have a background in cognitive neuroscience, and I'm really interested in how we perceive the world around us. I'm particularly interested in our sense of smell and also pain perception. And in my research, I've used some brain imaging methods to investigate how pain and smell are represented in the brain. I normally teach first and second year psychology students at DMU, and I teach biological psychology, cognitive psychology, and research methods. So today I'll be giving you a taster of some of the content on those modules during my talk.
Amazing. So we're going to be hearing from Stephanie in just a couple of moments, but I'd also like to introduce you to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, take it away.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Noon, and I'm a forensic psychologist. I've been at DMU for a long time. I'm not going to say how long. My specialism in my PhD is in police interviewing techniques, and I've worked for the Home Office looking at how you interview children in court. So I've done that kind of forensic work. I'm also doing research on detecting deception and cybercrime, and I'm going to be talking in a little bit about what we do in forensic psychology at DMU.
Amazing. Thank you very much both. And as Elizabeth just said there, we're going to be hearing a little bit more from her later on. So really, I guess it's time to kind of hand over to Stephanie, who's going to lead this first part of the presentation. Is going to be running a couple of demos. I can see a few people have already logged into the Menti, so thank you very much for that. And we'll let you know when the first sort of questions and demonstrations pop up. But Stephanie, it really is kind of over to yourself to lead this session now.
Great, thanks, Ben. Okay, so we've titled this talk Understanding the Mind, Insights from Psychology. And this is because if you choose to study psychology and you meet new people and you tell them you study psychology, you can almost guarantee the first thing they will say to you is, oh, so you can read my mind, I better be careful around you. And you'll hear people say that so many times that it will start to wind you up. But what you can say to them quite confidently is, no, I can't necessarily read your mind, but I do understand much more about how your mind works. And then they'll be super impressed. So if we can just get the next slide, I'll be giving an overview of today's talk. So we're going to be giving you a taster of some of the core and optional modules on our psychology course. As Ben mentioned, I've got some fun interactive activities for you as well. Then we're going to cover some basic information about the psychology course here at DMU in general. And we will then have a bit of a chat about some of the career options that psychology opens up for you. And then we should have some time at the end for a bit of a Q&A session. So, biological psychology is a core topic in first and second year psychology. And lots of our students kind of get intimidated by this if maybe they've not studied biology at A level, or some students kind of roll their eyes and go, why do I need to study biology if I'm a psychologist? But what I'm trying to convince you today is that biological psychology can be really fascinating and really fun. And it really is an essential part to understanding how our mind works. I don't have an A level in biology either, so that's really not something for you guys to worry about. I can get the next slide, please. I wanted to start off this section with a really quick optical illusion experiment that you guys can interact with on a platform we use all the time called Menti. So I know some of you have logged in already, but all you need to do is open up the internet browser on your phone or open up a new tab on your computer's internet browser. Go to menti.com and type in the 7-digit code that's being displayed on screen now. So we'll be using Menti for various things throughout this session. So do keep it open on your phone or your computer throughout the talk. Give you a few seconds to log in. And I just want you to look at the picture on the slides and respond as soon as you think you know the answer to the question. So the question is, which one of these squares is darker, square A or square B? So I'll give you a little bit of time just to log into that and answer the question. And once we've got some responses, we can display those responses on screen. Okay, so %42% of people have said A, 40, well, it's changing all the time. I'll give it another few seconds. The trouble with live experiments is you don't actually know if they're going to work on the day. So it seems like we're torn between two responses here. Some people think A is darker. Some people think they are both the same. Okay, Ben, can we go back to the slide, please? Great, so some people think A is darker. Some people think they're both the same. Some of those people might have seen this illusion before. So Ben, if you could just play the video for me. So I think if people are seeing this for the first time, a lot of people might think that square A is darker than square B. If you continue to watch the video though, something else becomes clear. So I think now people's answers might have changed. I don't think we need to watch this video all the way through. I don't know, Ben, if you're able to come out of that video yet. And now you can respond again on the Menti and tell me what you think now. Okay, so now almost 100% of people agree that both of those squares are the same. Some people are still responding, but we can see the clear winner is the idea that both of those squares are the same. So if I can get the next slide, please, Ben. So when we learn about biological psychology, we can understand more about what is actually happening in these kind of visual illusions. And what becomes really clear when we study the biological mechanisms of the senses is that there's somewhat a disconnect between sensation and perception, a difference between the external stimulus that we sense and the actual picture that we see. So in biological psychology, we learn about how a message is sent from the eye to the brain, which is what we call a bottom-up process. You may not be able to tell from the picture on this slide, it's actually a picture of what your eye looks like if we split it in half. And what we have are these photosensitive cells at the back of our eye, which respond to light and give rise to vision. What we also know, though, is that we've got top-down cognitive processes that influence perception. So in that visual illusion we just saw, the shadow created by the cylinder caused us to make some inferences about what colour square B should look like, given that there is a shadow. And this then overrides the sensory information that the eye perceives. Okay, so the shadow caused by the similar cylinder causes this cognitive inference that lead you to draw that square B is actually darker than square A, when in fact they are actually the same colour. And what you'll probably notice is that once you've seen that square A and B are in fact the same shade, you can't then unsee it. So perhaps if you had seen that visual illusion before, you knew immediately that they were in fact the same. Can I get the next slide, please, Ben? So in biological psychology, we also learn some fun stuff like how we perceive different colours. And one theory of colour perception is what we call the trichromatic theory. So trichromatic theory suggests that we have 3 different types of cells at the back of our eye that respond optimally to different wavelengths of light. So you'll see from this graph that we have short wavelength cones which respond optimally to short wavelengths of light and therefore give rise to the perception of blue colours. We've got medium wavelength cone cells which respond to medium wavelength light and give rise to perception of green. And finally, we've got some long wavelength cone cells. They respond to long wavelengths of light and give rise to the perception of yellows and reds. So we perceive colour on the basis of the wavelength of light that enters our eyes and how our different numbers of cone cells respond to it. Now, as individuals, we all have different numbers of short, medium and long wavelength cones compared to the next person. So that actually means that we all perceive colour slightly differently. So if you have ever had an argument with someone where, an argument with a friend over whether something is purple or pink, or whether something is red or pink, then that's probably why, because of these individual differences in the different cone cells that each of us has. So this brings me on quite nicely to the next demonstration. You might remember this coming up a few years back in the news and everyone losing their minds over it. So before we play the video, I'd like you to go back onto your Menti now and let me know what colour you think the dress is. Is it white and gold or is it blue and black? I'll give you a few seconds to respond and then perhaps Ben can show the Menti results on screen. Okay, so we do have a majority, and that's for blue and black. But it's still relatively close, actually. Okay, lovely. So blue and black still the majority, white and gold not far behind though. Personally, I see it as white and gold and I cannot perceive it any other way. Hopefully most of you have had a chance to respond. Can we go back to the slide, please, Ben? So one theory is that people perceive the dress as white and gold and some people as blue and black because of these individual differences in the number of cone cells that people have. So this explanation would really be a bottom-up biological explanation. The video I'm going to play for you now, though, explains another theory, which is more of like a top-down cognitive explanation. So Ben, can we get to see the video?
Alright, so the world has seemingly become utterly divided on this dress. What colors do you see? On the one hand, we have team black and blue, on the other, team white and gold. We asked on Twitter and got hundreds of responses for both white and gold and black and blue. For what it's worth, we both saw black and blue and thought this was a massive prank at first. So how can it be possible for people to see it so differently? It's a phenomenon known as color constancy. Take this cube, for example. The middle square on the top appears to be a shade of brown, while the one on the side looks much more orange. But in actuality, they're both the exact same color. We promise we haven't cheated here or done any trick photography. Instead, our brain looks at the context, sees a shadow, and instantly thinks, oh, shadows make objects appear darker. And so the brain compensates and interprets the square as lighter than it appears, until the shadow is taken away. Back to the dress, and we have a similar situation, except here the context is very arbitrary. We're so close up to the dress that we don't really know its surroundings, and the brain has to make assumptions. People who picture the dress as white have brains which may be interpreting the dress in a blue lit room, for example, as in it's near a window with a bright blue sky. It makes perfect sense then that the white dress would be tinted blue and that the gold color wouldn't really change. On the other hand, the brains of people who see it as black and blue may be interpreting the dress in an artificially lit setting like somewhere with yellow lights. As a result, the brain sees the gold as just a reflection off of the black and believes that the blue has been unaffected. Chances are that this image just happens to be perfectly ambiguous to our brain, meaning it all comes down to individual perception and even how and where you view the image. From a factual standpoint, the dress is blue. In fact, here are some other pictures of it. But this is a beautiful example of how our brains have evolved to interpret the world around us without us even realizing. Want more answers to the world's craziest phenomena? Get the ASAP Science book to feed your curiosity at asapscience.com/book. We'll put a link in the description. And subscribe to our channel for more weekly science videos.
Okay, so I must have watched that video about 100 times now, and I honestly cannot fathom the fact that the dress is blue and black in real life. I can only see it as white and gold, and I can't see it any other way. So that video explained this idea that kind of context is king, and these cognitive influences can affect the way we perceive things. So that brings us from biological psychology quite nicely onto cognitive psychology. So in this next section, I'll be covering some of the material from our cognitive psychology courses. And I just wanted to start off with a demonstration of a software called PsychoPy, which we teach our students to use in second year. So PsychoPy is a software that can be used to build experiments. So I'm going to share my screen with you now and try and open that up. And this did work when I tested it right before the session. So I'm going to open it. It works now. Yes, you can see my screen. So I'm going to go onto my PsychoPy window. So this might not mean much to you at the moment, but what you can see is like this flow chart at the bottom of the screen here. And this flow chart basically tells us about everything that's going to happen in this experiment. So we've got instructions for our practice trials, and then you can see we've got our practice trial loop here. This little square contains information about what happens in the trial and how the participant is going to respond to whatever happens in that trial. And then you've got the main trials of the experiment. Again, you've got some prior instructions, the information about what happens in the trials, and then finally a thank you screen. If we look at some of the other options of the buttons that we've got here, you can see that PsychoPy allows you to input images, sounds, keyboard presses, text. So it's really quite a flexible software that you can use to present participants with anything you like, really, within reason for an experiment. So whether that's pictures of emotional faces, whether it's sounds, relaxing sounds versus arousing sounds, and so on, you can do that in PsychoPy. And we do teach this as part of our cognitive psychology course in second year. I'm just going to really quickly show you this experiment so you can see what that might look like. I'm praying that this actually works for me. Here we go. Okay, so in this experiment, what we're asking participants to do is to decide which animal is bigger in real life. So if the animal on the left is bigger in real life, I'm going to click A. If the animal on the right is bigger in real life, I'm going to click K. Okay, so those are our instructions. Wow, okay, so a duck is not bigger than a giraffe in real life. So it's going to take me a while, but I'm going to press K. And it's going to tell me well done because I got that answer right. Again, bat, no, that's not bigger than a giraffe, so I'm still going to click giraffe, and it's going to take me a long time to respond. If I get the wrong answer, so on this, if I say, yes, a bat is actually bigger than a hippo, it's going to tell me, oops, I got the wrong answer. So what you can see here is that we've got these kind of congruent and incongruent trials. So the congruent trials is where the trial where the animal is bigger in real life is bigger in the picture. So this is an incongruent trial because a duck is obviously smaller than a hippopotamus in real life, but it appears bigger on the screen here. So this could either cause participants to respond in the wrong way, or it might just take them a little bit longer to respond normally. Here we've got a congruent trial, so of course a giraffe is bigger than a duck in real life. So this is a congruent trial, and I can usually come up with the answer, the correct answer, very quickly. Here's a congruent one. And again. And this is another incongruent trial. So we've got our duck. It's going to take us longer to go, okay, no, hippo is bigger in real life. So I'm going to come out of that now. Demonstration worked. Hope you enjoyed it. If we could now go on to the next slide, please, Ben. So I've now got another experiment to show you, which you guys can actually participate in. So make sure you've got your Menti back open. What I want you to do is look at the words on the screen, and I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to look at them. And I want you to memorize the words as best you can. Okay, so 30 seconds is starting now. Okay, 30 seconds is up. Now using the Menti, I'd like you to recall as many words as you can. Okay, Ben, can you show the results on screen for us? So the biggest words on the screen are the ones that are recalled the most frequently. So you can see there, shoe was quite big. Again, this is a live experiment, so I have no idea if it's actually going to work. Okay. So we can see on screen that shoe and ocean were two of the most frequently recalled words on the slide. So Ben, if we could go back to the slides, please. So normally what we see is that the most commonly remembered words in this list are shoe and ocean, and that's because they are the first and the last words on the list. So what we're really demonstrating here is a primacy and a recency effect. The word shoe and ocean are generally remembered better because they are at the start and end of the list in comparison to words like judge and hook, which appear in the middle of the list. So I think on the next slide, we've just got a reminder of the list. So yeah, you can see shoe and ocean were the first and last words, and judge and hook were somewhere in the middle. So if we went back onto our Menti, we'd probably see judge and hook were kind of the smallest words and perhaps not recalled quite as often. Can we see? Not sure if that's worked. Again, it's a live experiment. I do apologise. So if we can go back to the slides. So what you'd normally see if you collected data for an experiment like this is this sort of distribution, where the first and the last items on the list are the ones that have the highest percentage recall, whilst the middle items have a slightly lower percentage of recall. I've got another one for you now. So can you take a look at these words on the screen for 30 seconds and try and memorise them as best you can? Okay, that's 30 seconds up. Can you recall as many of those words as you can now on Menti for me? Okay, Ben, can we see the results? So I was keeping everything crossed that this experiment was going to work, but we must have a very smart audience out there this evening that aren't very easily influenced by my experiments. So we do have the word sleep on screen. So some of you might have thought that the word sleep appeared in that list. Was the word sleep in the original list? Ben, can you show the previous slide with the words on it for me? No, so the word sleep was in fact not on the slide, but what we can see is that all of the words on this slide are related to the word sleep. So in this case, some of you kind of accidentally recalled the word sleep when it wasn't necessarily in, or it wasn't actually in the list at all. So in this case, the word sleep is what we call a critical law in cognitive psychology. So that's a falsely remembered word which was recalled because of its association with the words on the slide. So we might say that the words on the slide primed us to recall the associated word sleep. So what this actually tells us really is that our memories are not always as accurate as we might think. Now this leads me quite nicely onto our material on forensic psychology. So now I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Noon, who's going to be talking about her expertise on forensic psychology.
Thank you. Thanks. Great. Okay. So as I said earlier, I teach forensic psychology, and that's turning out to be a really popular area within psychology generally. And what we mean by forensic psychology is everything that relates to things to do with the legal system, the justice system. So it's to do with crime, it's to do with what happens in court as well. And a lot of you, if we can go to the next slide, then a lot of you might, if you're doing A-level and you're doing A-level psychology and doing eyewitness testimony, you probably will have heard of Loftus and Palmer's very classic 1974 experiment, where they got people to have a look at a car crash and they asked them how fast the cars were going. But they changed the verb that they used in the question. And depending on the verb they used, people estimated the speed very differently. So if they said, how fast were they going when they smashed into each other? People said about 40 miles an hour. When they contacted each other, they said about 30 miles an hour. Now, that would make a big difference in a road accident if you're estimating speed in a 30 mile an hour speed limit. But what it showed us is, firstly, that our eyewitness memory is not always that accurate. It also shows us that the way we deal with eyewitnesses actually can affect what they remember. So that was really important. So if we go on now, what I want to show you here, this is Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson. Some of you may have come across this couple. They're not a married couple, they're just a couple of friends, and they look very happy together, and that's all wonderful. However, if you look into their case, the reason that they are now friends is because they met in very different circumstances. Jennifer Thompson identified Ronald Cotton as her attacker, and he was sent to prison for 10 years before being released. He wasn't the attacker. And if we look at the next slide, you can see that this is Ronald Cotton on the left, and on the right, you'll see someone called Bobby Poole. Now, Ronald Cotton was in prison for 10 years, as I said. And when he was in prison, people kept mistaking him for a new person who had arrived in the prison, who was Bobby Poole. And on that basis, he tried to appeal that it wasn't him who committed the crime, it was Bobby Poole. He'd heard that Bobby Poole had admitted it. That took ages, the appeal didn't work. And then if we go to the next slide, after 10 years, Ronald Cotton was released from prison. So he had lost 10 years of his life, and that had affected his family. But on top of that, you have Jennifer Thompson, who had to live with the fact that she had put this man into prison for 10 years because she had identified him, and she's absolutely convinced that he was the man who attacked her. Okay. And this next slide really tells us how this whole issue was resolved. What happened was Jennifer Thompson had identified Ronald Cotton, but when DNA analysis was invented, we started to look at some of these cases where people believe they're innocent. And the Innocence Project started looking at evidence to see if people were guilty or not. And in 2010, they reported that they'd had over 250 DNA exonerations, so people who'd had their DNA tested, and it was proved that they were not the offender. And what the researchers told us is that one of the key things that causes these types of miscarriages of justice is misidentification by an eyewitness. Okay, the numbers are continuing to grow, and this is really important because it's you only can exonerate people if you've got DNA. If you haven't, you can't. There's still innocent people in prison, and what this tells us, if you're doing Loftus and Palmer and thinking this is not really relevant today, actually it really is, because what psychology is doing in this field is it's looking at eyewitness accuracy and the factors that affect identification. So Jennifer Thompson looked at the pictures for ages before she made her decision. Now we know that's a red flag. If people don't immediately identify someone, it's possible that they're wrong. We also know important information about the best way to interview witnesses and get all suspects to get information from them. And we also know that some people sometimes make false confessions. So psychology is really relevant within this sort of legal setting. Okay. The next thing that we tend to cover in forensic psychology, particularly at De Montfort, is what causes crime. Most people ask, in terms of forensic, they watch Criminal Minds and forensic psychology, we want to know, why do people commit crime? And if we look at this next slide, you'll see Fred West and Rose West, who murdered their daughter and a number of other young women and buried them in their cellar. And most people look at this and cannot understand, why would somebody do that? So in terms of forensic psychology, what we're trying to do, and if we look at the next slides, what we're trying to do is come up with an understanding of why people commit crime. Now, that understanding is necessarily complex because you have very different people committing very different types of crime in different circumstances. So Fred and Rose West did a particularly violent type of crime. It differs to shoplifting, for example. And the question we next then have to say, so what is it that causes it? Is it the genetic influence? Is it that we're born with a genetic determination that's going to make us aggressive or likely to commit a a crime. And some people have looked at this in great depth, and more recently, and if we look at the next slide, in 2011, Professor Rain started looking at brain scans of children to see if you could identify who might become criminals in the future. That sounds really interesting. As a psychologist, and we'd talk about this on the module, but as a psychologist, we wouldn't take just that one factor into account. It may be that some people have a predisposition to be criminal, but it's dangerous to start looking at children's brain scans and making decisions at that point. The other things we need to think about are in terms of, is it our environment? So how much of crime can be determined by where we grow up, what we learn in our environment, and how disadvantaged we might be, for example. The next question, sometimes related to environment, is it the company we keep? Is it our social environment? So if you're doing A-level psychology, you probably already know about learning and social learning. And those are really key factors that we need to understand more about in deciding why an individual might be committing crime and how we can try and intervene to stop them committing further crimes. And the next slide is another topic that we do within forensic psychology. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, watch Criminal Minds, and people really do love that. And one of the topics there is offender profiling. You probably heard about this, and we have a situation where an offender profiler might be expected to go to a crime scene like this one on the right of the slide and make a decision about who's committed a crime like that. Now, with that slide, that's a slide of what we would call a disorganised crime scene. If we know it's disorganised, we can make some interpretations about the type of person who might have committed that crime. In my third year module, we look at how far that science of offender profiling is a legitimate science and what the criticisms of it might be. Okay, and then the final slide I've got for you. This is another topic that I'm particularly interested in and that we cover at De Montfort, and that is what makes people vulnerable to cybercrime and how we can protect them. If you think about this, I'm sure most people, and I certainly if I asked my younger children, what is it that makes you vulnerable? A lot of people will assume it's people in their 80s who don't know how to use a computer and things like that. What we're finding from the research is a lot of people are actually vulnerable at a much younger age, under 25, partly because they are really good with computers and then they become slightly overconfident. So there's a lot of research ongoing about that, and I'm doing some research on that myself. So in terms of forensic psychology, we're really looking at everything relating to the law and the legal system and offenders, why they commit crime, how we deal with that, punishment and things like that. But it's a big growing area within psychology. So I'll hand you back now to Stephanie, who's going to take it further from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. That was fascinating. So now I wanted to cover some of the material that we're currently teaching our first year students as part of the research methods module. So in this section, we're going to look at a quick bit of theory. I've got a question for you to answer in Menti, and then I'm going to give you a demonstration of the software that we use to teach statistics in first and second year. So if you've covered any kind of personality psychology, whether that's in your A-levels or at college, you might have heard of the big 5 personality traits. So these are openness, which means your sense of curiosity and creativity and novelty; conscientiousness, which is your ability to be organized and dependable. Then we've got extroversion, which I'm sure is the one most of you will have heard of. So the tendency to seek lots of conversation and stimulation from others. Then we've got agreeableness, which is a tendency to follow the rules, to trust other people and to help other people. And finally, neuroticism, which is our predisposition to psychological stress. So it is thought that we're all somewhere along the spectrum of each of these personality characteristics. If I can get the next slide. So I'm sure you're all sick to the back teeth of hearing about COVID-19 and lockdown restrictions, but it's current, so we're going to talk about it. So at the moment, with our first year students, we're looking at whether any of these different personality characteristics correlate with people's tendency to comply with lockdown restrictions. So I'm going to ask you to go back onto your Menti now and have a think about how much you think each of the big 5 personality characteristics influences how likely someone is to comply with lockdown restrictions. So you can vote on all 5. Maybe you think extroverts are going to, be really compliant with the restrictions, or vice versa. So have a go, have a look, have a vote on all 5, and then we'll have a look at the results and see which one comes out on top. So you can keep having a look back at those definitions on the slide. Can we see the results, Ben? Okay, so we've got agreeableness and conscientiousness coming out on top, which is interesting. Neuroticism's not far behind. Okay, well, thank you for engaging in that. So it does look like agreeableness is just about coming out on top. Conscientiousness a close second, and neuroticism's up there as well. So you think all of those 3 personality characteristics are probably quite likely to influence whether people stick to those lockdown restrictions. So that's great. Thank you for engaging in that. Can I get my slides back, please? So for one of their pieces of coursework, we asked our first year students to investigate whether there was a correlation between mask wearing and agreeableness. And this is because we have found some previous research, which has been published, that suggests that agreeableness correlated with overall lockdown compliance. So we thought, why not take this one step further and investigate whether agreeableness correlates with mask wearing. So I need to throw a disclaimer in here and say that the data that I'm about to show you is simulated data. It is not real. But I just wanted to use it to show you the software that we use so that you can see how it works, and hopefully I can convince you that even if you're not a big maths fan or you haven't studied A-level maths, you can absolutely still get to grips with statistics for psychology. So I'm going to share my screen again with you now and do an SPSS demo and just demonstrate what we're doing with our first years at the moment. So I think you can all see my screen again. I'm going to open up this program. So this is SPSS, and a lot of students sometimes freeze a little bit when they first get to grips with this software in the first year. So maybe if I kind of introduce it to you now, it's not going to be that scary when you come to look at it later. So what we've got here is our data file. In this data file, we've got all of the information about our participants in this particular study. So each participant has their own row. Their participant ID is here. So this is participant 1, participant 2, 3, and so on. We have got their age as part of the data. We've got information about their gender, and we've got their score on an agreeableness scale. So this is a measure of how agreeable they are as a person. And then they've got their self-reported mask wearing compliance, okay, on that final column. So this is what a basic data sheet looks like in SPSS. If I click on the variable view tab down here, this is basically like short version. Which variables do we have? We've got ID, we've got age, we've got gender, agreeableness, and mask wearing. And there's all the information about what type of data we've got, whether there are labels corresponding to different values that we've got in the data. So yeah, little introduction for you there on SPSS. Let's say I want to know how many males and females I had in the study. I can go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics and Frequencies, and I can say, I want to know about gender. And if I click OK, it's going to bring up this output window. So it's going to tell me I had a total of 85 participants in the study. 42 of those were female, and 43 of those were male. Let's say I now want to know what the mean age of my participants was. I also want to know what the average score was on the agreeableness scale, and on average, how compliant people were, or how compliant people said they were with mask wearing. I can go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Descriptives. I'm going to select all of the variables that I'm interested in. So that would be age. I can move that into the box. Agreeableness and mask wearing. I'm going to click options and just tell the program what I want to see. So really, I just want to see means and standard deviations, which are both ticked. A minimum and maximum is always a good thing to have as well. If I click continue and OK, it's going to give me this nice little table with my mean age. So I can see the mean age of participants was age 20, with the standard deviation just next to it. A score of 7.94 on the agreeableness scale, and the mask compliance score. So remember, this is self-reported mask compliance, and I must mention as well that's on a scale of 0 to 100%. So 0 being I've never worn a mask and I don't wear one, and 100% being I comply with mask wearing 100% of the time. So people scoring generally pretty high on that, nearly 80%. So the final thing I want to do is what our first years are doing for their coursework, and that is computing a correlation between the level of agreeableness and the mask wearing compliance. So if I go to, in fact, I'm going to show you a scatter plot actually. If I go to Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, and Scatter and Dot, I just want a simple scatter graph that shows the relationship between agreeableness and mask wearing compliance. If I just click OK. Again, simulated data, it's not real, but I think what we can see here is a kind of positive correlation between agreeableness and mask wearing. And if I actually compute the statistics for that correlation by going Analyze, Correlate, Rate. Again, I just pop the variables I want to know about in the box. And it's going to give me my output table. So this is what tells me whether there is a statistically significant correlation between agreeableness and mask wearing. I know it's significant because I've got these two little stars next to the statistic, and our p-value is less than 0.05. Okay, and I think that's enough statistics today. So if we can go back to the slides, please, Ben. Okay, so that's all of our kind of course content stuff for this evening. And the final thing I wanted to talk to you about today is just some general information about our psychology course here at the MU. And just to give you a little bit of an insight into what life might look like if you do choose to study here. So you might be thinking, what makes DMU so great compared to other universities? First of all, I'd say we do offer a really challenging but also intellectually stimulating course. You'll develop a wide range of graduate skills. And when we come to talk about careers at the end with Elizabeth, we'll touch on that range of skills and the graduate options that you have in some more detail. We've got lots of expert, enthusiastic and approachable lecturers, just like me and Elizabeth. And I can honestly say the psychology team here at DMU is the nicest team of people that I've ever worked with. All of the lecturers here, they really, really care about the students and their experience, and they'll always be happy to give you help and support whenever you need it. We've got a great set of facilities here at DMU. Again, the teaching and the research spaces that we have here are far more modern than any other institution that I've worked at before. And I think that's one really great thing about DMU. We've got a lovely campus as well. DMU provides lots of extra opportunities for personal development and employability experience. So whilst you're studying, things like DMU Global, which includes going on international trips and studying a second language. You've got opportunities for volunteering in the community through DMU Local. We've also got the Front Runner scheme and the Psychology Research Experience scheme. So they allow you to get some work experience and even some real life research experience as well. And all of these things just open up more doors for you when you do come to graduate. If I can get the next slide, please. So the psychology course at DMU is a BSc, which stands for Bachelor of Science with Honours. It's been designed to give you a broad knowledge of the theories and methods across psychology. And I guess the most important thing to mention here is that we are a BPS accredited course. So you need the BPS accredited qualification to become a chartered psychologist. So that means if you do want to become a psychologist and specialise in something like clinical or educational psychology after you graduate, then this course is a really good start. One other great thing is that just a couple of years ago, we started offering an optional employment year placement to all students. So that's like a sandwich year between the second year and the third year. So basically you can go away and get a year's paid work experience in an institution or a company before you start your final year of study, which again just puts you one step ahead when you try to get a job after you graduate. It really gives you a foot in the door. Can I get the next slide? So the modules that you'll study in first and second year are listed on this slide, and we've touched on what's covered in a few of these in tonight's talk. So we've had some demonstrations from biological and cognitive psychology. We've took a brief look at personality and research methods, but you'll also be covering things like developmental psychology, social psychology, psychology of mental health. Sorry, that used to be called abnormal psychology, which is what it says on the slide, but the module is now called psychology of mental health. Can I get the next slide? So once you get to your third year, you do then have the opportunity to specialise by choosing the modules that you take. So you've got all of these optional modules like forensic psychology, cyber psychology, cognitive neuropsychology, counselling and clinical psychology. One other thing I must say here is that the availability of these modules depends on the staff that we have in the team at the time and their particular areas of expertise. But there will always be a range of interesting modules for you to pick in your final year. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Noon now, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about careers and employability opportunities.
Hi. Right, yes, careers and employability. Now, a lot of people don't know all about psychology before they start the degree, and they tend to think of it as just being clinical psychology. What you need to know is that I'm going to talk to you in a minute about the types of career you can go into within psychology, but also because of the type of transferable skills we have within this degree, it makes it a really good degree if you're not sure what you want to do. But it's a good degree because it's applicable to lots of other types of professions like HR and things like that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But you're developing transferable skills. So employability skills, we give you plenty of practice at volunteering and working and so on and so forth. You're developing your critical thinking and reasoning. We get you to write reports and you're going to analyse data. So Stephanie's shown you a little bit about some of the SPSS stuff we do and how we analyse data. So you can take those skills with you into any job you go into because you can look at data and write a report. We encourage team working, and you will be working with other students and also doing an oral presentation at some point. It's a great thing to do that because if you go to your new job, you've already done it. You've got through all the worry and stuff in a really safe environment. You've got your data analysis and presentation. Debating skills, we get students to have little debates to develop that, so it prepares you for a career environment. And it's a scientific degree. It's numeric. You can work with figures and you can write convincingly as well. So those are the transferable skills. In terms of what you can do with your psychology degree, your career options. On this slide, you'll see on the one side, you've got the opportunity to become a psychologist. Once you've got your British Psychological Society accredited degree, your BPS accredited degree, you can then apply to go on to become a professional psychologist. And the areas that people tend to know about are things like clinical and counselling. So that's working with people with mental health issues or concerns or things they're trying to deal with in life. A lot of people might have heard of educational psychologists, and you might have come across them in colleges. Those people will work with individuals within a school or a college environment and work out strategies for helping to support them with whatever difficulties they're having educationally or in terms of mental health. Forensic psychology, which obviously I know a little bit about, a lot of forensic psychologists are going to work in prisons, but they also work in the police and other places as well. Health psychology, one you might not have thought about, that's a growing area, and you might have seen some people on TV talking about COVID who are health psychologists and how people behave in terms of health. Neuropsychology, which is an important one that obviously Stephanie is very interested in. You might not have heard of occupational psychology. That's working within the workplace. So how do you develop your team? How do you keep people happy? How do you get people to perform at their best? Sport and exercise psychology, you might not be aware of that. That's a really growing area within psychology, and that's working with individuals, sports people, teams, but also doing motivational things as well. Teaching research, so people like Stephanie and me, we teach and we do research. And there are other areas that people can use their degree in. Now, if you don't want to become a psychologist as such, then there's loads of different careers that really do relish having people with a psychology degree because of all those transferable skills I mentioned. So marketing, public relations, advertising, human resources, social workers, pharmaceutical reps, health-related things like health visitors, market research, management, or even going into something like the civil service. So the career options are really quite broad with psychology. Okay, so I think that's me done on that one, if we're ready to move on to the next bit.
We are indeed. Thank you so much to the both of you for delivering an absolutely fantastic set of presentations and obviously some fantastic demos and some interactive sessions with Stephanie. That was absolutely brilliant. So what we're going to do in just a couple of minutes is we're actually going to be joined by some graduates and some students who are going to be able to again talk to us a little bit more about their kind of experiences being on the course. All positive things, I hope, with Stephanie and Elizabeth joining us here in the studio. They're not going to start saying anything, I'm sure, but then they're going to be able to tell us a little bit about, particularly with some of the students that have gone on to do sort of masters and PhDs, where they've gone on to kind of work after the fact, and also again just to see kind of what opportunities they've had on the courses. We are going to be moving more into a sort of Q&A session as well. So if you do have any questions at all, you can pop those into the YouTube comments. I know we've already had one for Elizabeth, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. But you can also submit your questions via the Menti. So if you're still logged into the Menti, you can actually use that to submit your questions as well. And we'll try and take a few questions from both when we introduce our students in just a couple of moments. But until that point, what we're going to do is we're going to play you a quick video actually just to show you some of the facilities that you'll see at DMU. Stephanie mentioned there saying that we've got some fantastic facilities, some really modern facilities. So it'd be really nice today for you to have a little look at what they look like inside.
Welcome to the Health and Life Sciences faculty. My name is Sorsha Newby and I study the BSc Honours degree in Psychology, and the majority of my degree takes place here at the Hawthorne building. Students here at DMU can partner up their studies with an amazing chance to go on a DMU global trip. I recently got back from Paris as part of my cognitive neuropsychology module and it was amazing. Psychology opens a lot of doors for graduate jobs and placements. There is a dedicated placement team here at the Edith Murphy building that can help you find a graduate job suited for you. So here we are in the Hawthorne Undercroft, where students can come and work and study and chill. I sometimes come here to work on my dissertation for my final year, which is based on how anxiety can affect a child's sleep quality. This is related to some of my modules this year, which is cognitive neuropsychology, clinical and counselling psychology. So that's all we've got time for here today at Psychology, but if you wanted to find out more, please come along to one of our open days and see for yourself. For me, this whole degree and my whole journey has been amazing. It's really helped me grow as a person and become more independent, especially living at home alone and being here, managing my own time. It's really gave me confidence to go for what I want and that I wouldn't normally do before. And
that's perfect, thank you.
Yay, awesome, thank you.
There's a little bit at the end that was left in the video that I hadn't realised, but there we go. So that was a little look at some of the facilities that we offer at DMU from one of our current students, which is brilliant. Before we move into introducing some of our students, and I can see we've had a couple of questions come through on the Menti, so we'll get to those in a second. But I want to jump back over to yourself, Elizabeth, because we had a little question a little bit earlier, so I'd like to tackle that first. And in your opinion, with regards to forensic psychology, what's the hardest part?
That's a really good question. And the thing with that question is it kind of depends on what area of forensic psychology you go into. Mm-hmm. Now, about 40% of people will go on and work with offenders in a prison setting or something like that. So, and we take I've taken students into our local prison to get a discussion with the forensic psychologist and the team working there. And if you're working in that environment, you have to know that it's a difficult environment to be in. You have people with really difficult problems to deal with, but it can also be a really rewarding environment. So that's problematic. If you work in, if you're working, say, with children giving evidence or with individuals giving, victims and witnesses giving evidence, that can be quite challenging, quite upsetting. But in terms of the hardest part, it depends what you do, and I think you very quickly learn what level of anxiety and emotion you can cope with and what suits you best. So you might be better as a researcher, you might be better actually working with individuals on the ground. Mm-hmm. Hope that answers your question.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. And then Stephanie, I didn't want you to feel left out, so I have also got a question for yourself. And this was related to the demo that you did a couple of minutes ago. So we had a question come through on the Menti that just asked, how are you doing experiments and research projects during COVID-19? So thank you very much for submitting that question through to the Menti.
There's only one word for that, and that is online. Unfortunately, at the moment, most face-to-face research has been sort of postponed because of the COVID-19 situation. Particularly for myself, I used to get people coming into the lab, smelling things, occasionally tasting things, and putting EEG equipment on their heads and things like this, which we simply just can't do at the moment because of the situation. So we have done our best really to move everything online. The PsychoPi software that I showed you at the very beginning, that has an add-on whereby you can actually host that experiment online. So you can basically send a guest link out to participants via email or via a web page, and they are then able to enter that experiment from their computer without having any software. And that's a really, really good way that you can collect data quickly from lots of participants online. So yeah, it has had its kind of drawbacks, but actually the digital capabilities that we've all built up for research from this situation has really been of benefit. And with online studies, they do allow you to collect a vast amount of data from a large amount of people. You're reaching people potentially from all over the world when you can deliver an experiment online. So it's a really, really good way to get a broad sample as well.
Lovely, thank you very much, and say thank you very much for your question. We've had a couple come through, so we'll try and tackle a few of those before we end the stream. But I think it's time to introduce some extra guests into the live stream as well. So we'll bring them in one by one so they can do a little introduction. And we're going to start with Nabila. Good evening, Nabila.
Good evening, Ben. How are you?
Yes, not too bad. Thank you very much for joining us. Would you like to tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Nabila, and I'm currently a PhD student at De Montfort University. I'm in my third and final year now, or is it fourth? Well, I'm near the end, hopefully. But before that, I had studied my undergraduate degree for 3 years at DMU in single honor psychology. So I have been at DMU studying psychology for quite some time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about the course or the university as well.
Lovely. So we'll hear a little bit more about Nabila and her PhD in just a few moments. But next person I'd like to introduce you to is Hannah. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, guys. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Hannah, and I graduated 2 years ago from De Montfort on single honours psychology. From there, I went on to do a master's in cyber psychology at a different university. I've just finished a 6-month internship that was sponsored by De Montfort. And then I have just accepted a position with South Yorkshire Police as an investigations officer.
Lovely. So we'll hear a little bit more about that as well in just a couple of moments. But then last but certainly not least is Jasmine, who is currently studying with us. Jasmine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine. I'm currently doing a joint honours with psychology and criminology undergrad. This is my second year, so I have another year left, and yeah, like everyone else, I'm more than happy to answer any questions about the course.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So a couple of questions for you guys, first of all. So Jasmine, just to start with yourself, because you are currently doing the joint honours in psychology with criminology. Yeah. So why did you choose this sort of joint option, so that students are aware that we have got these joint options available to our students? Why was this the one that you chose?
At the time that I was moving to university, I was definitely, like a lot of students, so confused, not really sure what direction I wanted to go down. But I definitely loved criminology and I loved psychology. So I was like, how am I going to mix these two together? Mm-hmm. Then I went to the open days and the taster days such like this, but in person. And I think it was a criminology teacher. He said, why don't you do both? And then I decided to try both of them. And it's so amazing now because you don't actually have to decide. There's so many jobs with both of them that you realize once you start the course that it's just never ending what you can do with both of them, having the joint honours.
Amazing. And some of those were mentioned by obviously Elizabeth a few minutes ago when she was going through some of those career options. So that's brilliant. So what kind of opportunities and things have you got up to as part of the course, Jasmine?
So in the criminology aspect, I think there was like a practical where you can go into like a crime house that we have at De Montfort University and look at like solve investigations as if you was working in a real world situation. Then obviously on psychology, you get to do amazing experiments. Like Dr. Stephanie said, right at the moment they're online, but hopefully that can finish quickly and we can get back into the labs and stuff. It's all really exciting. So there's, like I said, there's so much that you can actually do with doing a joint honours that you don't have to really know which one you want to go into when you start, but by the end you'll definitely have an idea of which direction maybe you want to go into more.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Nabila, you can touch on that a little bit in a moment as well. But before we do, Stephanie or Elizabeth, a quick question for you. So obviously with Jasmine doing the sort of joint honours, what kind of benefit would you find with doing a joint honours for students that are thinking about it? Because we've had a couple of students in the comments that are kind of asking about it as well.
I think one of the key things you need to be aware of is what Stephanie talked about earlier, which is our British Psychological Society accreditation. If you want to get that, then you would have to, and you want to do a joint, and that's great. The degrees that are labelled psychology with, say psychology with criminology, they have the BPS accreditation that you'd be looking for. If it's the other way around, they don't have BPS accreditation. Now, if you're interested mainly in criminology, that's fine. But if you are thinking about possibly wanting to go on to be a psychologist, then you would need to take the BPS route. That's the one thing I'd say. But in terms of having the option to study two subjects, especially as Jasmine said, you're not sure which one you want to do, then it is a great option.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Steph, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I don't have much to add. Yeah, I think especially where we are at DMU, criminology links quite nicely because we have got lots of staff with expertise in forensic psychology as well. So I think the two courses do link quite well together.
I was just going to say, sorry to jump in, Ben.
No, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the one downside is that obviously you when you do two subjects, it means you by not doing 100% psychology, it means you lose a little bit of the psychology. So for example, when you come to your third year where you get to choose lots of different options, you have fewer choices. And at the moment it means that people doing psychology with criminology, they'll have to do my criminological and forensic psychology module, so it won't be an option. So they have slightly less choice, but that's what happens when you have two subject areas. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And then just to tie into that, we had a question in the Menti for yourself, Jasmine. They've asked, what is the split between the two subjects? So Elizabeth, you touched on it really briefly there, but I wonder whether you could give a bit of an insight from your perspective.
Oh no, sorry, Jasmine. Sorry.
Anyone can go first. I don't mind.
No, Jasmine, you go. You go, Jasmine.
So in the first year, I think we had 2 criminology modules, and then the rest of your modules were psychology modules. But that's because I did the psychology with the criminology. For me, I think it was enough because you still have to find out. You still learn about the main core areas of criminology. That is like an important aspect of the joint course. In the second year, it does get a bit less criminology, and you only have like 1 module in the criminology. However, at the end of your undergraduate, because you have done the joint, you can still go into criminology. It doesn't mean that because you haven't done a lot of it, you can only go into psychology now. At the end, you can definitely go into criminology and work further in that direction. There's no limitations to it. Like I said, you're not stuck to any one permanently. You can definitely move if you feel that you've had too much psychology or too much criminology. But also, if you do decide to take the criminology with psychology route, it will probably be the other way around. So you might have 1 or 2 psychology modules, but you'll have mainly criminology modules, which is what a lot of my friends are doing. And to be honest, they are definitely liking that one more because they're more into the criminology side. So like I said, it's just whatever you want to do, there's an option. I just don't want anyone to feel that because they pick the joint in any of them, they're limited now to do the other one in the future, because you're not. So yeah.
Lovely. Elizabeth, did you want to add anything to there, or is it?
I think Jasmine's made the points really well. Yeah, I think it's about 75%. It's about 75%. So it's just how much you do, and if you're really interested in both, that's great. But just be aware you don't have all the choices if you go for a joint. That's all. The other students might have something to say there.
No, lovely. Thank you very much. What we'll do is we'll quickly move on because I want to hear from Nabila and Hannah as well, so we can get through to a few more questions. So Nabila, obviously you mentioned before about obviously you're currently doing this sort of PhD. You're almost at the end of your PhD. You feel like you've been with us forever. So what were your kind of roots into psychology, and what has kind of got you to the position you are now?
Okay, so actually building a little bit on what Elizabeth and Jasmine said, I picked single honors psychology primarily because I had the idea in my head that I wanted to study possibly clinical or counseling psychology. And one of the important modules in the second year that I didn't want to miss out on was abnormal psychology, which was really interesting to me, and which is why I selected single honors psychology instead of psychology with criminology, because I believe that module you wouldn't be able to study that in the second year. Yeah. I was interested in criminology as well, and actually the amazing thing was in my final year I had the optional module to pick criminology and forensic psychology in my third year, which was amazing. I had Elizabeth Noon as my lecturer, and it was awesome. We really enjoyed, like a lot of people enjoyed those lectures, and they were always very fun. So yeah, that's kind of why I picked single honors psychology. And in high school, my subjects were very varied because I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to study at university. So I did biology, geography, history, thinking skills, and English language, which is a mad combination. But I think the biology aspect and the idea in my head that I wanted to work as a counselor or a clinical psychologist led me towards psychology. I didn't study psychology at A-level, and I think it's really important to note that you don't have to have done A-level psychology to go on to do psychology at university. I didn't feel at all at a disadvantage at any point. So yeah, it's just important. If you haven't studied psychology, you don't have to have it to study it at DMU. Mm-hmm. And really just the fact that I've gone on to a PhD, I mean, when I got into the university, I had an idea of what I wanted to do. And as I studied the course and I was exposed to different areas that I had never even heard of before, I realized that maybe I was more interested in something else. And cognitive psychology, which is the area I'm specializing in now, was probably one of my favorite modules. And I really enjoyed learning about attention and memory and perception, just basically how the human mind works. And so I wanted to investigate this further, and I studied research methods, and I learned about PsychoPi, as Stephanie had mentioned earlier. And I really enjoyed just interacting with participants. And so I decided that research was the route that I wanted to go down. And so a PhD was just the natural next step for me. Yeah, so that's kind of my journey towards where I am right now. And it was all very trial and error, to be honest. I had a lot of ideas. I thought clinical psychology, and then I went into educational psychology, and yeah, neither were good for me, I think, and I'm happy where I am now. So definitely building on what Jasmine said, you don't have to know what you want to do. There's a lot of different areas that you can go into along the way.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Nabila. So hearing a little bit about the sort of PhD side of things as another potential option for students that do go down that kind of psychology route. Just quickly before we jump into a few more questions, because there are a couple that have come through that I do want to get to, I want to hear from Hannah as well, who's currently or has kind of been working in industry and has got herself a position with the police as an investigations officer. So firstly, could you just tell us a little bit about your kind of experience on the course and what led you to that kind of role?
Yeah, so I had a great time at De Montfort, and from my third year modules, I preferred the cyber psychology module. As a result of that, I chose to go and do a MSc, so a master's, at a different university, only because De Montfort didn't offer it. And from there, I realised that the things I preferred were researching and interviewing other people. I then went on and did a sort of an internship. It was funded by De Montfort. Even though I'd left De Montfort funded this internship for me. And then from that internship, I've got a full-time position with the investigations officers at the South Yorkshire Police, which is where I'm from.
Amazing. So what sort of stuff will you be doing as part of that? Is it similar to your internship?
It's similar and it's also different. So one of the things you do throughout your course at DMU and on psychology is research methods. As part of that, you're interviewing lots of different people, participants. You learn how to do research techniques. My job now will be interviewing victims of things like murders and rapes, and I will be responsible for victim care and for looking after them, but also for conducting and running the investigation as a whole.
Cool. That sounds really exciting. And obviously that was stuff that, as you mentioned there, obviously learning certain skills like research skills, for instance, has obviously really supported you into going into that particular role. So that's really exciting. And it's really nice to hear from the sort of three of you after we've had obviously these sort of taster lectures from Elizabeth and Stephanie this evening or this afternoon. I don't even know what time it is anymore, but it's been really nice to obviously hear from those demos, but then obviously see where that's kind of seeded from Jasmine, who's kind of already is currently studying with us, to Hannah and Nabila, have obviously gone on to other things as they've kind of moved forward. So it's really nice, I think, just to kind of see those progressions for students as potential options. So we're going to move into a few more questions, and we'll try and get through some of these, and we may run a couple of minutes over if we want to get through a couple of these questions. So the first one I just want to go over to is a question from Evie that asked a few minutes ago, and I think this is one more directed at Elizabeth and Stephanie, is sort of roughly how long it takes to become a sort of psychology teacher or researcher. So again, asking about those career opportunities.
Go first. So for me personally, I did my undergraduate degree at University of Liverpool, which was 3 years. And then I went on to do a master's and a PhD. The master's was 1 year and the PhD was 3 years. So that was 7 years in total. Then I went down to work in London in my first kind of research post, and that was for about 18 months. And it was after that that I then joined the MU, and I say I've been here for almost 3 years now. I'm still actually currently training to become a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, so I'm still kind of doing my teacher training to be a university lecturer, and DMU actually allow me to do that as an apprenticeship alongside. So it's like a they call it the PG cap. So that's my official training to become a fellow of higher education. So it kind of took me 7 years, I guess, to go from undergraduate to being a qualified researcher, and then I'm still actually in training now to become a fully fledged teacher.
Lovely, thank you. And Elizabeth, what about yourself?
Relatively similar. I did my first degree, a 3-year degree at Leicester University, and then I did a PhD there. Whilst I was doing my PhD, I started working for the Home Office as well. So I ended up, instead of doing my PhD in 3 years, I took a little bit longer, but I also did two bits of research for the Home Office at the same time. And then I joined De Montfort, so it's a long time ago. And then I joined De Montfort, and I've been there since.
Lovely, thank you. So again, another potential sort of career path for students to be aware of if they decide to go down the route of psychology, which is brilliant. Thank you very much. So looking at the Menti, we've had a couple of questions about placements, so placement opportunities within psychology. So one student has asked, if we apply for university without a placement year, can we still change our minds? Can we still take a placement? And then also just looking at the kind of employers or the kind of placement opportunities. Again, I don't know if Jasmine, Hannah or Nabila, if you've taken a placement, but we'll come to you guys in a second if Steph or Elizabeth, you want to tackle one of those.
I mean, it's worth saying the placement is quite a new scheme that we've got going, and what you will do is you don't have to make a decision before you apply. You can apply, and we ask people to make a decision about whether or not they're going to take their placement year sort of before the end of the second year. So you've got plenty of time to think about it. In that time, you'll discover a little bit more about what part of psychology you really enjoy. So you might be able to focus your attention on where you might want to work. We have had people who've done a year studying abroad, and we've had people who are having placements to go and work. So it might be that people could do a placement to, I've had one student who's been asking about doing a placement to go and work in our local prison for a year and then come back. So it would be very much about you being very proactive about what you're interested in doing and trying to find that opportunity for you to do the placement would best help you with your career for afterwards, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stephanie, do you have anything you wanted to add with regards to placements?
Nothing to add there, no.
No, lovely. And then Jasmine, Hannah, Nabila, have you guys taken placement opportunities? Obviously, Hannah, you've talked a little bit about your internship, but I didn't know if you guys had anything you wanted to add around placement opportunities.
Nabila, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, so I'll kind of just mention, so placements weren't really an option for me whilst I was doing my degree. However, I should say that there were plenty of opportunities for me to get involved in kind of extracurricular activities that allowed me to gain experience. And I think that was really important. So through the DMU local initiative, I managed to kind of volunteer in a variety of different areas that touched on different modules that I studied in psychology. So I did some work with Diabetes UK. I volunteered at a local school. I volunteered with refugees. And so a lot of what the skills that I developed through the course, I was able to practice and apply in a more realistic setting, which I think is really important for students to realize there are opportunities for you to do that alongside your degree. There's plenty of time, if you manage your time well, for you to get involved in volunteering and, do quite well and be successful throughout your degree. So that's how I managed to get all the experience that I currently have. There's also frontrunner internships that are offered at the university, which were really amazing because I took part in one of those and I helped as a research assistant within the psychology department. And that was a paid opportunity as well. And that was alongside my degree, which was really amazing. So if you don't manage to get a placement, or maybe it's not something you're interested in doing because it is a whole year, there are things that you can do alongside your degree available through the university.
Lovely. And Jasmine?
So yeah, exactly what Nabila said. You don't have to do a placement. There's so many more opportunities that as soon as you get here, you'll realize it is kind of shoved down your throat. Whatever you want to do, we've got something for you. There's a lot of it here. But I've taken the DMU Global route currently, and I've applied to go to Canada for a year. I'm not too sure if I'm still definitely going, obviously the pandemic and everything. But hopefully, if I get that opportunity, it's not necessarily a placement, but you get to go to other countries around the world and study there. You still get to study psychology and whatever you chose to study, and you just get to broaden your experiences with other people, learn how for example your course is taught in other countries, what other people may get from your course, because we can all learn in De Montfort University and learn great from our lecturers and etc. But as soon as you leave that, it's a complete different world. Everyone has different ways of viewing psychology and criminology. So to just get that extra bit of experience is definitely recommended. But like Nabila said, do not feel forced to leave the whole year and go into a whole year placement, because there are so many other opportunities, such like jobs and stuff like that. It's all out there. So yeah, you'll definitely have a chance to have some sort of placement, whether working or volunteering. So.
Lovely, thank you. And actually, one of the questions I was going to pose to the group was about volunteering, but you've between the two of you, yourself and Nabila, you've wrapped that up quite nicely. Obviously, that's a good part of the group, and obviously, Elizabeth, you mentioned students doing placements in things like the prison, and I know we've had students actually go and do volunteering in prisons as well. So lots of opportunities to kind of get those additional work skills around psychology, as well as obviously all of those more sort of clinic-based skills where you're actually working in labs and you're doing various things around sort of testing, similar to some of the stuff that Stephanie was talking about earlier. So that's absolutely brilliant. One of the questions that I'm going to pose to our sort of grads and students is sort of lecture time and how much time you actually spend in lectures every week. So Jasmine, maybe start with you first as our current student, and then I'll go to Hannah and Nabila to find out a little bit about sort of the break between lectures and independent study, maybe. So Jasmine, starting with you.
Yeah, so currently with the online studying, it's still pretty much the same. You usually maybe have like a day off in a week if you're lucky. If you don't, you might have like one lesson that day, but it's never really long that you'll be in a lecture. And for people like me that have medical conditions that sometimes you can't make lectures and stuff, we have a really good system where your lectures are recorded anyway. So if you miss it, you can always catch up on lectures. But in terms of time, it's normally about an hour lecture you have at once. And then you might have, if you have a full day, it could be from 9 to 5 with your normal hour lunch. But it's not too full on. And if it is, you can definitely communicate that and definitely take time out. It's not so harsh on you to attend lectures, as long as you're keeping in contact with your teachers on why you can't attend, and if you can't, then they'll definitely help you catch up. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about the length of them, because it's not really going to affect you too much.
Lovely. And then Hannah and Nabila, cast your minds back a little bit to when you were in your undergraduates. You know, what was the kind of the sort of time management aspects? Maybe start with Hannah, because we've not heard from you for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so I averaged about 10 to 15 hours in university a week, and I would do at least 15 hours then on top myself in the library, doing my own work, independent study. It's worth noting that one of the modules you do in your third year requires 50 hours of work experience, or some of that's voluntary. So that's something else you have to do at the side of your degree, but there is plenty of time for your own independent study and to get all these volunteering activities, these extra things that you might want to get out of your university experience as well.
Lovely, thank you, Hannah. And Nabila?
Yeah, very similar to what Hannah said, about averaging 10 to 15 hours a week, and then spent the rest of the time jumping between volunteering, maybe a bit of part-time work, but mainly doing background reading and just preparing for assignments. I think it's important for students to realize that you are given your assignments, your deadlines, everything pretty much in the first week. So you kind of know when everything is going to happen, and you should be able to plan your time very well around that, because there is a lot of extensive reading that's required. You have to prepare for your lectures. You've got seminars and workshops to do as well. So the time is available, but you need to make sure that you utilize it effectively. And if you do that, you'll definitely be able to fit everything in, as well as maintain a healthy social life as well, which I think I've managed to do a little bit of. But yeah, not too much contact time, but a lot of independent study is required.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think that's important for a lot of university courses. That sort of independent study and wider reading is very, very crucial for a lot of students. And it can be a big jump from your sort of college work into university, but again, you get an awful lot of support from people such as Elizabeth and Stephanie that we've been joined by this evening. So again, there's quite a lot of questions that have come through on the Menti. We're not going to get to all of them today, because obviously we also want to go and have our dinner and everything like that. But there's a couple of bits that I wanted to touch on before we leave. So again, as somebody that personally that doesn't know anything to do with psychology particularly, we've had a couple of questions around things like clinical psychology and occupational therapy. So maybe if Elizabeth or Stephanie, if you could clear up maybe the kind of differences with those and how that relates to what we offer at DMU.
Yeah. Do you want me to go, Stephanie?
I'll go if you want. Maybe I'll go and then you go. So clinical psychology is, I guess, the specialty where you will be working with patients in a clinical setting. So whether that's people with depression or schizophrenia, eating disorders, kind of neurological issues or brain injuries. So the spectrum is still quite broad, even within clinical psychology. In order to become a clinical psychologist, there will be some further study involved. So you'll need to complete a clinical doctorate. So that's probably worth making a distinction as well between a research PhD and a clinical PhD. So once you get to the end of your degree, if you want to do any sort of postgraduate study, know that a PhD in psychology is normally a research PhD, and then the clinical doctorate is something entirely different. So it's still a PhD, but it's the one that you need to go down the clinical route and to become a clinical psychologist eventually. The process of that, I think you need to normally do some work as what they call an assistant psychologist. So it's just basically a year or 2 years of kind of extended work experience, which you may or may not get paid for whilst you apply to get onto the clinical doctorate. Some people are really lucky and they get onto the clinical doctorate first time, and for some people it takes a couple of years or so in order to get onto the course. And then after that, you'll be a qualified clinical psychologist. I don't know much about occupational therapy. What I do know is that it basically involves getting people who have had accidents or suffered from mental health issues or suffered brain injury or trauma or anything like that. And it's about getting them back into work. So that, as an undergraduate degree, is normally quite a clinical based again. So your degree will involve you going out on placements most of the time, as well as the academic work. And that gives you a really direct route then into that career. But I would say occupational psychology might cover some occupational therapy would cover some psychology theory that is still quite distinct from psychology, if that makes sense.
No, go for it, Elizabeth. Sorry.
I was just going to say, when I talked about the different occupations within psychology, occupational psychology is very much about work-related things and how to make people work well in a work environment. But if those people with those questions are still coming in, and I know we have to finish soon, if you go onto the British Psychological Society website and you click on careers, there'll be little videos and there'll be information about what each area of psychology does and how you can get involved in it, perhaps how long it'll take you to get involved and to graduate as a clinical psychologist, for example.
Lovely, thank you. And we do get some similar questions around psychology every so often, where there's, again, as we've talked about, there's lots of different areas. So I think it's just quite nice, maybe just to clear that up for students that are thinking of going down that route, so they're clear in their mind on what their options are. Conscious of time, so we'll do maybe one other question, looking more sort of broadly at maybe advice around students that are thinking of applying to psychology. So I'm going to leave this with our students to start with. So maybe Jasmine, so what sort of advice would you provide for students that are thinking of applying for something like psychology?
Just go for it. Like Nabila said, you don't need to have studied it previously. As long as you look at the entry requirements, which I think is just 5 GCSEs, A star to C. It doesn't matter what they're in, and that is very important to remember. And as long as you've got, I think it's a BTEC, I'm not entirely sure, but it's not as hard as you might think it is to get in. And once you're in, like I said, you're not limited to psychology only. And even if you do love psychology, there are so many different options to go into with psychology. I think it's a Maths and English pass C and above for GCSEs, so it's not too difficult at all. But yeah, just go for it. Don't be afraid. Even with this pandemic, don't let it stop you from applying, because the amount of teaching and the amount of time that you're spending studying is pretty much the same. It hasn't really changed. It might be better because now you get to be a bit more comfortable while you're studying. But yeah, it's definitely not a reason to not want to apply. So yeah, hopefully I see you guys soon.
Perfect, thank you. And what we've done is we've popped a link to the course pages in the comments, so you can use the link in the comments to go and find out a little bit more if you are sort of unsure about entry criteria and that sort of thing. We'll go over to Hannah next. Hannah, just any sort of last advice for our students before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say I didn't know which course to pick once I was finishing my A-levels. I chose psychology because it was so broad and there were so many things I could go into after it. And I haven't regretted that choice. I've enjoyed psychology. I've enjoyed continuing my studies in psychology. And even at the end of a master's degree, my job opportunities were still so varied and I could pretty much get and apply for whatever job I wanted. So I would take that into consideration.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then Nabila?
Yeah, very similar to what Hannah said. I'd advise people to have an open mind coming in. If you have an idea of what you might want to do, that's great, but be prepared. There's always something else out there that you might not have heard of. Like cyber psychology was something I didn't know was a thing, and cognitive neuropsychology as well. So you just never know. You might come across something that you really love. So just be ready to be flexible, because there's something out there that you just don't know about just yet.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Jasmine, Hannah and Nabila for just giving us a little bit of an insight into their experiences at DMU. And obviously, Hannah and Nabila, good luck obviously for the futures. And Hannah, your new kind of position with the police, absolutely fantastic. So we've had a couple of questions come through for you guys. Again, we're not going to have time to cover all those today, but hopefully for the students and the grads that have joined us, that was a good indication of their experiences at DMU. And before we wrap up, I just want to hear one last time from Stephanie and Elizabeth, just any kind of final thoughts about the courses, particularly. Maybe start with Steph.
Yeah, I think Nabila's comments actually resonated with me personally. I chose to do psychology as an undergraduate because I just loved the subject. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And similar to Nabila, I kind of just fell in love with cognitive neuroscience, realised I loved running experiments and interacting with participants, and that's how I kind of fell down the research route. As I was on the research route and started doing a little bit of teaching alongside research, that made me then fall in love with teaching as well, and that's kind of how I've got to where I am. And the only other thing I really wanted to say was thank you so much everyone for engaging with the interactive activity today, and thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all studying here soon.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Elizabeth, finally with yourself.
Yeah, again, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did psychology, thought I was going to do clinical, ended up doing forensic. And I think it's really worth having a good look at the subject, because there are so many opportunities available to you, and it can take you in so many good directions. And as all the students have said, it's a good opportunity. It's a great thing to do.
Yeah. Brilliant. I think that's a really nice note to end on, particularly as we had a couple of questions, obviously, to begin with around things like, the joint honours and the options around those. Obviously, we heard from Jasmine a little bit about those. And obviously, we've had some conversations around that. We've obviously discussed a little bit about careers and the routes into that. And obviously, again, we heard from Hannah and Nabila around those. So I think that is brilliant. And again, to hear that from both of your perspectives in terms of actually when you were back in their position, maybe you didn't know necessarily what you wanted to do, but now you're in these fantastic positions where you're able to sort of impart that knowledge. So I think that's a lovely place to end it on there. So apologies if we didn't get to your question today, but thank you so much to everyone that has watched along with us today, has participated in the Menti, as Stephanie said, and has obviously posted their questions. If there was something that you really desperately wanted to know and you can't find on the website, I say the link is in the comments now, but you can also drop the department an email. So the health and life sciences faculty have got an email address just there. You can email them and they will respond to you, and they'll obviously answer any questions that you might have, just generally about any of the sort of health and life sciences courses. So you can drop them an email if there's any sort of burning final questions that we didn't get to today. And also, of course, we have got an open day on the, and now it's going to test me because I'm definitely going to get the date wrong if I get to this stage. It is on the 13th of February. I did have to check my calendar for that one. So if you would like to speak to more of our students, or more of our academics around the psychology courses, or even indeed you just wanted to find out more about DMU, come along to our open day, digital open day that is, to find out a little bit more about the courses and the university. But I hope you are all staying safe. I hope you're all well, and we will see you at the next live stream or at the next open day. Thanks again for everybody watching, and take care. Bye everyone.
Bye.